Hi, I'm Ewan Blakey, Senior Pastor of Oasis Church. I hope this message gives you hope and helps you take your next step on your Christian journey. We'd love to invite you to come and see us in person at 10 a.m. on Sundays or join us live every Sunday on YouTube. For more info, visit our website, oasischurchperth.com.
Ooh, almost missed my cue. How are you guys? Christy was just telling me the stats for youth conference, which we just had. It was so good, so good. I got to go along the Friday night. I'm Jordan, by the way. Should say that. If you don't know me, I'm Jordan, one of the location pastors here. My gorgeous wife, Laura, and our two kids are sick today. I think we've got a few sick people here today. Who's got a sick family member? You got a sick family member? Yeah, wow, we've got a lot. Bless you guys, getting healthy. Anyway, youth conference. Youth conference was amazing, so good. I got to come along on Friday night. It was really, really awesome. We had 80 youth come along over the 2 days. So cool. 80 youth, and we had 8 first-time commitments to Jesus, 8 salvations. So it's so good. Clap for that. Really, really cool. It was my privilege to take them all out and have a little chat and give them Bibles, and it was real nice. It's a real privilege when that happens, and young people committing their life and just making the best decision they can ever make, and they don't know what they're in for. It's good. It's exciting. So all right, let's get into it. Well, speaking of sickness, I wanted to tell you about something. It's a bit of a confession, and you got to promise not to think that I'm a weirdo or think that I'm mentally unstable. All right? Does everyone? I solemnly swear that I will not think that my pastor is mentally unstable. So I was feeling really unwell earlier in the week, and have you guys heard about the onion trick on your feet? You put onions on your feet. You chop onions, you put them in plastic bags, you put them on your feet, you put socks over the top, and you go to bed. And you wake up better. And I did it 2 nights in a row, and I feel so good. I feel so good, guys. And I had to get my swag and put it in the study, and because I wasn't allowed in the bedroom because it stinks. So, you promised, remember? You promised that you wouldn't say I was mentally unstable, so there you go. But whether it's in my head or not, I'm gonna roll with it. All right, we should talk about Daniel. You guys want to talk about Daniel? All right, let's talk about Daniel. Let's do that. So we're in our Daniel series. We're jumping into Daniel chapter 3 today. So if you've got a Bible or a phone, you can turn to Daniel chapter 3 right now, because we're going to be reading it real soon. And this is one of the most well-known stories in the Bible, one of the most well-known stories in Daniel. It's Daniel's friends and the fiery furnace, so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So many of you would have know it very well, especially if you've been in Sunday school, especially if you're a long-time Sunday school teacher like my mum. Gives away, mum. Embarrass you. Would have probably done a lot of things on Daniel and the fiery furnace. So this story is all about a guy called Nebuchadnezzar and 3 guys, as I've already mentioned, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what happens is King Nebuchadnezzar, who's the Babylonian king, Babylon was in modern-day Iraq, central Iraq, and the city, the town, the main city was on the Euphrates River. So that's where it was located. But the expansion of the kingdom at that time was all the way across to Egypt, all the way up to the Tigris River, and all the way across to Israel. So it was this huge kingdom that King Nebuchadnezzar, and he was the second Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar ruled over that. And as some of the guys have already told you about, Daniel begins at the start of the exile, what we call the exile. So Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, they invade Jerusalem for the first time. They do it 2 more times after that. And over the course of 20 years, they basically abduct Israelites and take them back to Babylon. And they take the best ones first, the young guys, the smart guys, the nobles, and that's who Daniel and his friends were. And then later on, the third, these are just fun facts. You don't have to remember them, but if you wanted to, they're good fun facts. The third one is when Jerusalem was destroyed. So the third time Nebuchadnezzar invades Israel and lays siege to Jerusalem. They actually destroy the city, they destroy the temple, and then you can read about in Ezra and Nehemiah about rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. So that's a little bit of history for you. And the exile goes on for 70 years. So it's a really long time, they're slowly, over the course of 20 years, pretty much all get pulled out, except the poorest guys kind of get to stay and farm or whatever, but everyone gets pulled into Babylon. And for 70 years, they're exiled, and this is God's judgment on them because they have not stayed faithful to his covenant. And so we pick up the story with Nebuchadnezzar. So we're in Babylon. We're probably in a big city with a big ziggurat there, and he's built this massive golden statue, right? It's 27 meters high. I think this is about a 10 meter, maybe not even. Is it only 7? It's not 27 anyway. It's probably at least double the height of this, and it was 2.7 meters wide. So this massive golden statue he builds, and that statue represented either his kingdom or Nebuchadnezzar himself. And so he summons all the important people in Babylon, gets them all together, and he's going to dedicate the statue. And so he wants to have this big ceremony. And so gets them all together, and that includes not Daniel. We actually don't know where Daniel is in this story. There's a good chance because he had been promoted ruler over the whole kingdom of Babylon. So he's like second in command. He was effectively like the prime minister under the king. If you think of Nebuchadnezzar as the king, Daniel was the prime minister. He might have been off on royal business somewhere else in the province when this has happened, but he's not mentioned in this story. But we've got Daniel's 3 friends, and the way that these 3 guys get into this position, they'd been abducted by Nebuchadnezzar and taken and trained in the king's temple, as we've been hearing about over the last few weeks. And there's the things with the king's food and interpreting dreams and all this kind of stuff. And then in the chapter before, so last week, Jairus told us about how Daniel is the only one who's able, by God's impartation of basically a word of knowledge of the dream, he tells Pharaoh his dream, and he interprets the dream correctly. And Nebuchadnezzar promotes him, and then Daniel as ruler over the whole of Babylon. And then Daniel's basically his first act is to be like, hey, king, can you promote my 3 friends? They're going to be administrators. So they're effectively like governors or, state premiers or cabinet ministers. Like they had quite a lot of authority, not as much as Daniel. So that's kind of a little bit of background to the story. So Nebuchadnezzar has built this statue, and he wants everyone to bow down. And he says when the instruments play, everyone's going to fall down and worship the statue. It's pretty simple, right? You've got to worship the statue. So what happens is the instruments play, everybody bows down, they worship the statue, and everything's all good. Until some of the wise men came forward, and these guys, they're such tattletales. I just picture them being so snooty, They're just like these snooty wise men. And there's the snootiest guys. And they're like, hey, remember how you said that when the band plays, we all have to bow down? Like, Lord King, do you remember that you said that? And you know how you said that anyone who doesn't bow down, you said that they're going to have to get thrown into the fiery furnace? Well, those guys didn't bow down. Those Jews over there are not bowing when the music plays. So we're going to read off from there, Daniel chapter 3. So they're saying there's some Jews who don't pay attention to you, your majesty. They don't serve your gods, and they won't bow down to the statue. So Neb, he's raging. He's like so mad. He's super, super mad. He's high-key angry. All right, I've been at youth conference, so he's high-key angry. All right? I think I had another couple of those in the back of my brain, but I don't know if they're coming to me. I'm feeling a bit delulu, so we'll move on. So we pick up the story here. This is Nebuchadnezzar. It says, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace." It's total cue, like da-da-da moment. It's like there's definitely background music. It's Babylon we're talking about, guys. "And then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" How arrogant. What God will be able to rescue you from my hand? That's like such a challenge, right? I just think God was like, interesting. Shadrach and Abednego? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So, Neb's not happy when he hears this. Neb is pissed, guys, okay? He's furious. He is completely furious. And it actually says in the next passage, which I won't read, that his attitude towards them changed. So he was already furious, and then his attitude towards them changed. So he shifts it up a gear from furious. I don't know where you go from furious, but he went there. Here we go, I found them. Neb was big mad. He was big mad. Neb was shook. Any teens here? They'll all be at the 10:30, sleeping in. Neb was shook. They'll enjoy it later. You guys can tell them. It was funny. He was high-key angry, as I said. And it wasn't fire at all. And Neb's like, I'm going to slay in the furnace department. So Neb he actually orders the furnace to be heated up 7 times hotter. Like, why do you need the furnace to be 7 times hotter? Like, it's already a furnace. Like, it's already going to kill them. That's beyond furious, right? You're heating this furnace 7 times hotter. Do they even have measurements for, thermometers in Babylon? 607 BC or something like that? I don't know. It's already a furnace. And it probably, actually, what I was thinking was that if you turned it down, it would actually be better because it would be more painful. It would take longer for them to die, right? But he turns it up. So anyway, that's what happens. We won't dwell on that too long at all. But he's such a tizzy, and he gets his strongest soldiers and he ties them up, and he gets them to throw them into the furnace, right? And you guys know the story. I'm pretty sure you know the story, but those guys die because the furnace is so hot. They chuck them in, all bound together, robes and turbans and the whole shebang, looking great, into the furnace. He's not happy, Nebuchadnezzar. He's really not. And Nebuchadnezzar's pretty happy with himself by this point. I think his fury is starting to abate, and he's getting a bit of a smile on his face, and he's like, yep, I'm getting my sadistic tendencies, my kingly rage out on these naughty Jews. But then something happens, and we'll pick up in verse 25. But Neb sees something. Before I go to that, he sees something, and he's like, he turns to his advisors, and he's like, hey guys, how many people did we chuck in the fire? And they're like, they check their notes, and they three, King Nebuchadnezzar. They chucked 3 guys in the fire. So it's good they got that established. So it was just three Jews they threw in the fire, right? They check it out, and they realize there's only 3. Nebuchadnezzar jumps up, and he says this. He says, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and they didn't even smell like smoke. There was not a smell of fire on them. That's so crazy. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and they were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. Turns out his anger had not abated, he just directed it in a different direction. For no other God can save in this way. So how crazy, right? He goes from questioning God. Like what God will be able to rescue you from my hand, and now he's defending the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That is a backflip if I've ever seen one. So it's a pretty wild story, and it's pretty audacious, and it's pretty inspiring because these three guys have the clout to stand up to this king, and he was pretty much the most brutal king over Babylon ever. He was definitely the most powerful king over the Babylonian Empire ever to rule over it. And they refused to bow down and submit to the idols that was set up in their culture. And it was despite such immense pressure that was surrounding them, right? Like everyone's watching on. They know they're going to get seen if they don't bow down, but they can't. They can't do anything but trust God and stay faithful to him. So they refused to bow down to the idols. And they did it to the point of being willing to lose their own lives for the sake of their commitment to God. It's a pretty amazing example. It's a pretty crazy example. Thankfully, probably not a lot of us will ever have to face this kind of fire literally in our lives. Maybe some of us might become overseas missionaries and actually, possibly be at risk of suffering violence, suffering a threat to our life, as a lot of Christians across the world are even right now. But in our Western world, we kind of have the luxury, as we have many luxuries, of interpreting this in a little bit less of a literal way. But it can be still so encouraging for us to understand just a few things about what can we learn about how did they actually become these kind of guys who could stand in the fire, who could actually stand up to King Nebuchadnezzar. How did they become people who could stand in the fire? That's the question I asked myself when I read this passage. And so we're just going to unpack that a little bit. The results of what happened to them was four things. The King Nebuchadnezzar, just want to go over them again. He acknowledged and he praised God. He proclaimed the testimony of what God did for the three Israelites. He took steps to defend God's name, and he promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's pretty amazing results and outcomes for the fact that they stood their ground and they were willing to face death for their faith. So how did they become people who could stand in the fire? We don't really know anything about these guys before the start of Daniel. Like, there's not really any record that we have of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. I think I might have got the order wrong of that, but those were their Hebrew names, as Joe did a really great job pointing out. And King Neb changed their names and tried to change their identity and form their culture. And so this whole scene in Daniel 3 is another extension of Babylon trying to impose the culture in a very extreme way onto these Israelites. And it's, flagrant idol worship. Like, it's pretty clear cut. I kind of wish sometimes that idolatry in our lives was that simple. Like, just don't bow down at the 27-meter golden statue and you're okay. It's a little bit more nuanced. It's a little bit more complex than that, right? But I want to just give you 3 points. How did they become people who could stand in the fire? And what can we learn from them? And how can we become the same kind of people that can stand in our own fires? Fires that the enemy might bring against us. Fires that even God might allow in our lives to purify us, to bring about his glory. What can we learn from these things? I want to give you 3 things. And the first one is they had a pre-decided allegiance. A pre-decided allegiance. You should write that down. Daniel 3:16 said, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. Why didn't they need to defend themselves before Nebuchadnezzar? Like, don't you think, I think if it was me, I would have probably felt some pressure to justify my actions. Like, no, Nebuchadnezzar, sorry, like, I'm a Jew and I've, the covenants and trying to explain it all, like, and, this idol worship thing, we're not really allowed to do that. And they didn't do any of that, and sometimes I think we have that with situations that we get put in. We feel like we need to defend ourselves. And you don't always have to defend yourself. Oftentimes, the best thing to do is just to stand. It's just to stand your ground. And that's what they did. They were set on their convictions. They weren't trying to figure out in the moment of crisis who they would swear allegiance to. They had already done that from a very young age. They knew who their God was. They believed in him and they were committed to him. Faith is built before crisis comes. Faith is built before the crisis comes. When you're planted on what you believe, you tend not to get defensive because you're planted, you're solid, your house is built on the rock, you're secure. If you're not sure what you believe, if you're still figuring it out, it's easier to be a bit off kilter, a bit off balance, to feel like you have to defend yourself when an attack comes against you. But faith is built before the crisis comes. So I want to encourage you with that, guys. We might never face a fire like what Daniel faced, what these guys faced, not Daniel. Daniel faced the lion's den, which is pretty epic too. But we do face fires in our lives. And, some of the fires are everyday fires, like, sickness. Just my car tire was flat. My family's sick. Like, there's lots of everyday fires, and they're kind of a little bit more like singeing your finger on the stove. They're not big deal fires, right? They sting a bit. There's some heat there. They have sort of a relative, relation to what we're talking about. But I think often, those aren't really the big situations that God sets up to do something like what he was doing with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those are the situations that God uses to prepare us for those big moments in our lives where we have to stand in the real blazing inferno, scary fire, whatever it might be. The terminal diagnosis, the mental health struggle, the relationship breakdown, the struggle with addiction. These kind of things are the real fires in our lives. And there's a big part where the enemy, because we're in a spiritual battle, right? And the enemy has a big part to play. And I've heard it said that the enemy often attacks you in the places where you define reality and in the places where you elevate. So in the Western world, we are intellectual and materialistic, right? So we're not rich. It doesn't mean we're rich and smart necessarily, but it means that we elevate the mind and we elevate what we can touch, what we can see, and especially what we can buy at the shops, right? So we're intellectual and materialistic. And so often what you'll find is the enemy will attack you in those areas. And I believe that that's why in the Western world we have such a major epidemic of mental illness. Because the enemy attacks us in the area that we elevate. He attacks us in almost the area that we idolize. Does that make sense? We'll keep unpacking that. Hopefully you start to pick up what I'm talking about. I just want to loop back for a second. Faith is built through a devoted lifestyle. So like good Jews, these guys had probably been raised to pray something called the Shema, which is a Jewish prayer, and it's comprised of 3 Old Testament passages. I'm just going to read you a couple sentences from it. From Deuteronomy 6:4 and Deuteronomy 11, it says this: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength." And the other part says this: "Be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them." How interesting is that? And the Shema is quite long. You might have even seen it in The Chosen. They riff off that and they do that, the disciples. It's really cool. And that's, where Jesus draws the first and then the second commandment, right? Like, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. these guys were schooled in this from a very young age. So what I'm trying to say to you about how do we prepare for the fires in our lives is even from a very young age. We can train our kids. We can train our young people. We love our next gen ministry here. We love kids so much. And we can prepare them for the fires that they're going to face in the future now, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's parents would have done by having them recite the Shema. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was ringing in their ears when they were standing before Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Be careful. You know, even their mum or their dad's voice, be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them. Be careful, Shadrach. Be careful, Meshach. Be careful, Abednego. I'm sure in their ears was ringing, love the Lord your God. You know, our God is one. There is only one God. There is only one God. I'm sure these things were ringing in their ears. And we can do this for ourselves by meditating on Scripture, by just being in the Word and soaking ourselves in it, by having good Bible conversations, you know, holy conversations. You know, the word meditate means to mutter. It's like to growl. You can just brood over a word, a verse, a passage, and it gets in you. It gets in you. And then when it's in you, you have it when you most need it, right? You have it when you most need it. Like how many of us have a favorite Bible passage that they go back to when they're most in need? Like one of mine is Psalm 27. You know, the Lord is my stronghold. He's my strong tower. I can run to him in times of help. He protects my heart. Encourage you, if you don't have passages like that you go to, find some. Find a place where God meets you as you're reading and I remember that, and I'm going to go back there, and I'm going to go back there. And when I'm really struggling, I'm going to go back there. And if you do that enough, then even when you don't have it with you, you can go back there, and you can use it, and you can speak it, and you can pray it. Faith is built through a devoted lifestyle. And you don't become fireproof in the fire. You don't become fireproof in the fire. Faith that stands in the fire begins with a choice, with a determination of spirit not to bow to anything other than God himself. In the same way that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were presented with an idol, they were confronted by fear that if they didn't bow down, and their fear was a very real fear. It was a fear of death, fear of the blazing inferno that's right there, probably already running. And we're also presented with idols in our lives and pressure to conform. But often it's much more subtle. It's not so obvious and easy, say that lightly because the furnace, it's nothing easy about that. But there's idols, and I just want to highlight 4 idols in our society that are kind of, I think they're possibly the big 4, or they're 4 big ones anyway, that it's important to be on our guard against. And in Daniel we're talking a lot about being on our guard against culture, against the influence of culture, because these young men and then all the other Israelites, the Babylonians were imposing their culture on them. And we live in a culture where it's trying to impose itself on us, right? And if you don't kind of toe the line, you can get cancelled. If you don't toe the line, you can be ostracized and marginalized and slandered and all sorts of things. There's so much reverse discrimination. Sometimes I just don't understand it. But 4 things. They're not going to come up on the screen, so you've got to remember them. Individual autonomy. Individual autonomy. What does that mean? It means I define who I am, and no one tells me how to live. I define who I am. No one tells me how to live. Self becomes God. You could call it secular humanism. Authority is seen as oppressive and wrong. All authority is bad. And truth becomes subjective. That's the first one. Number 2, comfort and lifestyle. This is a big one. And we've got to be careful with these kind of things because, God gives so many good things to us, right?